faith is like a muscle. And the more you work it out, like when you work out physically, does anybody in here work out physically? Anybody? Are we all that bad? But you work out physically, why? So you don't lose muscle, right? But if you don't work out, guess what? You lose it. It goes away. Well, faith is the exact same way. If you neglect faith, right, you're going to lose your strength when it comes to your faith. But if you exercise faith, the stronger your faith is going to get. Did you know that life is filled with so many decisions? Like the average American, the study has come out and said that the average American makes 35,000 decisions per day. Unless you're married, the guys, you're cut in half. They're made for you. I'm just kidding you. 35,000 decisions that we're faced to make every single day. And that research shown that the more decisions that you have to make, the poorer of the decisions you actually make. The quality of your decision making goes down when you're faced with more options. Does that make sense? It does make sense. Sometimes we might think if I got more decisions, I can make a better choice. But no, a lot of times we find ourselves making the wrong choice. They've labeled this phenomenon decision fatigue. And this is why you can make a string of really good decisions. You can decide that you're going to eat healthy, and then all of a sudden you go home and you eat a half a gallon of ice cream. And this is why you can decide, hey, I'm going to save money, I'm going to get on a budget, and you can go with that for a period of time, then all of a sudden you go out and you make a dumb financial purchase. We went in Sam's Club a couple months back, and Dina saw this arcade game in there. And instantly she wanted an old arcade game from the 80s so we could play Centipede. All right, it might have been me, but she jumped on board with it too, okay? She jumped on board. Well, I was surprised when she said, yeah, that's a good idea. I'm like, really? Needless to say, I took it back 2 weeks later when it didn't live up to its expectations of taking me back to the 1980s. But we've all made dumb financial decisions after we said we're going to save money and we're going to get on a budget and all that. And since we are bombarded with so many choices and making decisions, what I want us to discover is how we can regularly make better decisions. And I want to tell you something incredibly encouraging, that a person of faith has a massive advantage when it comes to making better decisions than a person not of the faith. Why is that? It's because for the person of faith, there are some things that are pre-decided when you're walking with God. And those pre-decisions in your life change the way that you process those choices as you run into them in your life. Hebrews chapter 11, if you have your Bibles, you can turn there with me this morning. And we're going to look at verse 17 through 22. It says, it was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings for the future to his sons, Jacob and Esau. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. It was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. And he even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left. What we're going to see in this passage is that faith looks a lot differently. Faith decides differently. It's because faith has pre-decided three things that change the landscape of every other decision that you're going to make. And I want to make 3 points this morning. The first point is this: faith has decided to obey God. Faith has decided to obey God. It says here that it was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Warren Wiersbe says this. He says, faith that cannot be tested cannot be trusted. And it makes sense to us. Would you ever fly on a new airplane if that airplane had never been tested before? Not a chance, right? Would you ever go to a doctor and allow a doctor to perform surgery on you who had never been tested through medical school? No. I'm sorry, Casey, but you ain't going to, no surgery on me right now, all right? You got to be tested so that you can be trusted. And a faith that cannot be tested cannot be trusted. And the writer of Hebrews is pointing to the biggest test of faith you could ever have. Look at it in Genesis chapter 22 with me. Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son and your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took two of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God told him about. So much of life hinges on our willingness, on our predecision to simply do this, obey God no matter what he says. And when you watch Abraham's response to what God says, there are two truths that emerge about what it looks like to really obey God. And the first of these truths is this, is that obedience is informed. Write that down if you're taking notes this morning. Obedience is informed. We follow God, we obey God out of an informed obedience. When God spoke to Abraham, he knew that if he obeyed, that it meant the death of Isaac. But it also meant the death of the promises of God that he had made to Abraham. Because every one of the promises into the future that God had made would come through who? His son Isaac, right? And so Isaac is sacrificed. If he's sacrificed, that would mean that the promises don't happen. And so if Isaac dies, then it seems like the promises die with it. And that's a problem if God is trustworthy. The scholar William Lane writes about this moment in Abraham's life by saying this: when Abraham obeyed God's mandate to leave Ur, he simply gave up his past. So Ur was his home country, but when he was summoned to Mount Moriah to deliver his own son to God, he was asked to surrender his future as well. We talked about the past surrender last week. Today we're talking about the future surrender. Have you surrendered your future to God and put it in His hands? Now here's why this is so hard, because when it comes to surrendering our future, just like Abraham is looking at the death of Isaac and the death of the promise, often obedience can look like death, because there are things that you wanted to do. There are things that just felt good. And some of you, like you're in a marriage and the marriage struggling right now, like it's difficult, like it's hard. And God has said, no, but stay in the marriage. Don't give up on your marriage. And it feels like death, right? In those times, in those situations, in those moments. And some of you this morning, you know what? You're single. And God has called you to remain single in this particular season of your life. And it feels like death to you, right? And some of you have had a dream in your heart, and God said, I want you to hold on to that dream for right now. I don't want you to wait on that. I want you to just be patient with me on that. And you're like, but I don't want to be patient. I don't want to wait for my dream. And it feels like death in that moment. Maybe some of you are in a job that you don't like, and God has not released you to move on, and it feels like death. Some of you are maybe in a job that you absolutely love, like you love where you're at, but for some reason you are sensing God's telling you to move on. But you're afraid of the unknown. You're afraid of stepping out and doing something new. And in a moment right there, it feels like death of security and death of the known, because God's asked you to leave the known. Oftentimes, you see, obedience oftentimes will feel like death. But when you think about the life of Abraham, what allowed Abraham to say yes to God in this moment? You see, Abraham wasn't only tested in this moment, but Abraham had been tested before this moment. Yet every time, when you read the story of Abraham, every time he was tested, you know what Abraham did? He deviated. Think about this. God said, I'm going to give you a son, and here's how it's going to happen. And Abraham thought that he had to help God out at one point. He's like, God, it's been years since you said that, and so I guess I'm going to have to figure out how this is going to happen. But I can also look in the rearview mirror and see every time that I have decided to actually obey God, and God has been trustworthy, and every time I have decided to surrender to God, God has brought me to safety. And every time I have bent my knee to His will, He has been faithful to me. And there were times when Abraham absolutely 100% did that with all of his heart, with no hesitation. Can anybody testify in this room that when you followed God wholeheartedly, and that He went before you, and that He actually helped you, and that He was faithful to you? Does anybody have stories about that? Sure we do. That's informed obedience. That's where obedience starts. Look at verse 17 of Hebrews 11. It says, it was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Now, when you think about this word offered, our English word, doesn't really fully convey what is meant by the Greek that is used here. Because in the Greek, it's the Greek word prospero. And offered is in the perfect tense. It signifies a completed action in past time. Right? And so, in other words, when the writer of Hebrews says Abraham offered Isaac, it views Abraham's offering as already completed in his heart. He's already done it. Because if you don't know the story of Abraham offering Isaac, what happens is he gets right down to the very last moment, right before he's going to sacrifice his son, and the angel of the Lord stops him in that moment. And so when you think about what the writer of Hebrews is saying there, he can be like, well, God stopped me. God stopped him. God didn't offer him up. Abraham didn't have to offer him up. But before Abraham ever got to the altar, he'd already done it in his heart. It's past tense. Does that make sense? It was a foregone conclusion that he was going to do exactly what God said. Can I ask a question to you this morning? Is it a foregone conclusion that when God speaks to you, that you're going to do it? Is it a foregone conclusion that when God says something about your life that you're going to follow whatever it is God tells you to do? Is it a foregone conclusion that if God says to go this way, that you're going to go that way, even without deviating? Not only did Abraham have informed obedience, but notice that Abraham also had immediate obedience. Write that down. He had immediate obedience. If obedience isn't immediate, then it's not obedience. Did you hear me? If obedience is not immediate, then it's not obedience. Delay and procrastination are the same as disobedience. And actually, delay dulls the voice of the Spirit of God in our lives. When you put it off, that's saying, God, I'm not ready to embrace your timetable yet. I'm not ready to embrace what you have said to me quite yet. How about I go this way for a little while longer? How about I do it my way for a little bit longer, and then maybe I'll try your way? Obedience is meant to be immediate. And that's exactly what Abraham does. Look at verse 3 of Genesis 22. It says, the next morning, Abraham got up what? What did it say there? Got up how? When? I'm waiting on somebody else to say it. Early. She came in. I'm sitting in the back row. Oh, I forgot my shoes. Oh, and then she came back. Oh, I moved into a new house. We're in transition. I'm like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Did you know all week long that you were coming to Sunlight on Sunday morning? All week. Could you have found those shoes maybe last Friday? Every night, every Saturday night, I set my clothes out, I set my shoes out. I'm all ready to go for Sunday morning. Y'all should try it. Or maybe she should just try it. But if there was ever going to be a day for Abraham to sleep in, you know what? And not be able to find his shoes, it would have been that day right there. The day he was going to offer up his son. I would have delayed everything that I could have in my bone, waiting for God to tell me something different. But Abraham says, no, God's spoken to my heart, and I'm getting up early, and I'm doing it right away. And in fact, it takes Abraham less than 24 hours to do what God told him to do. And some of us listen to this, know things in the back of our mind from 24 years ago that God has told us to do, and we're still wrestling with God about it. I think about my own calling in life, and I think about how when I was in high school and graduating high school, I sent very strongly that God wanted me in ministry, and I ran for that, from that calling in my life for 17 years, a long time of running. If God has spoken to your heart, obey it. If He said do it, do it. If He said give it, give it. If He says go, then go. Why? Because immediate obedience is real obedience. That's point number one. All right, how we doing? Oh, gosh, I got to go fast. Point number two, you ready? Point number two. Faith has decided that God will do the impossible. Somebody say, will do. Because a lot of Christians have decided that God might do the impossible. Or a lot of Christians say that He can do the impossible. But faith has decided that God what? Will do the impossible. Abraham is facing what seems like an impossible situation. It makes no sense to him. He's struggling to wrap his mind around it. It's going to rip his heart out, as it would any father. He knows he's going, though, to obey God. He doesn't just know how. He may not know how he's going to do it, but he knows he's going to do it. And God, you know, I've said yes to you, and so you have my yes. But God, now how? How am I going to do it, God? How am I going to get through this decision? How am I going to do what you have said? But as he thinks about it, he realizes this, that faith has decided that I'm not only going to obey no matter what, but no matter what, I'm going to see God do the impossible. Because blessing always follows obedience. You want to see a miracle in your situation? It starts with you obeying God. You want to see a miracle in your marriage? Then you obey God in your marriage. You want to see a miracle in your finances? Then my question is, are you obeying God when it comes to your finances? Because blessing follows obedience. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19 says, Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. Now the problem, again, with our English translations here is they don't adequately communicate what's happening in this text. It makes it look like Abraham's casually considering that God might do something. Well, He might raise him from the dead. You never know. He's God. He's able. Which is the way that a lot of Christians think about their situation. Well, I mean, maybe He will. I mean, I don't know. It stands to reason that God might do that. But it never rises in our hearts and our minds to the level of God will do this. The Greek word that is used here for reasoned is way more powerful than that. David Allen writes about this word. He says, it could only be sorted out in Abraham's mind that God must intend to raise Isaac from the dead. Thus, Abraham's reasoned is a word meaning inward conviction and not merely a considered opinion. In other words, this was not the realm in the realm of opinion for Abraham. It was in the realm of God is actually going to do it. And that's a lot different. God is going to do a miracle. God is going to help me. God is going to bring about a resurrection. God is going to flip the script in this because of who God is. And I want to tell you, when you look at things like that, it gives you a completely different perspective in life. And not only does the Greek word point us to the fact that Abraham had decided what he knew God would do in this situation, we also see this in Genesis chapter 22, verse 5. It says, "Stay here with the donkeys," Abraham told his servants. "The boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, and then what? We will come right back." Who's going to come right back? We. He's like, we'll be right back. Abraham is anticipating either a resurrection or something else that God, that he can't even fathom. But the writer of Hebrews says that he really believes he's anticipating a resurrection of his son. Now, I don't know where you're at today, and I don't know what you're up against today. I don't know what God has called you to obey Him in, but I can tell you this. You're on solid footing on the Word of God if you are anticipating God is going to do a miracle in your situation. Because that's what the people of faith did in the Bible. They didn't operate in might, or they didn't operate on maybe. They operated in God will do it as I obey Him. Now here's something about Abraham we need to apply to our lives. Abraham always considered God before anything or anyone else. Well, the doctor said this. Well, listen, I love doctors. Don't get me wrong. I think doctors are great. But they are not the first factor in my equation. Are you with me? If they're the first factor in any equation, that's not good. But the first factor in my equation is God. God and equation is God. God, doctors, and whatever other factors are there, yeah. But I want you to understand, I begin with God. You know what? You know what really sometimes bothers me a lot is a lot of times, people say, "Hey, Pastor, doctor said, we need to do this. Pray for me, but don't tell anybody." Why? I'm sorry, but the first person I want is God intervening in my life, not some doctor intervening in my life. Well, I don't want to know till I find out exactly what the doctor says. Why? It's not doctor first, it's God first. And if I'll be honest with you, if I hear any crackling of anything wrong with me, I'm going to come to you and say, "Hey, I have no idea what's going on. I haven't seen the doctors yet, but I'm going to tell you this. Can y'all just pray? Pray. Because I want God, number one, in that equation. You will never plan for a miracle until your thinking starts with God, the God of the impossible. So I don't know what you're thinking about today. I don't know what you are considering today, but maybe, just maybe, you need to take an eraser out and just wipe away the old equation and start with God at the top of the equation and say, "God, I've looked at this the wrong way. I've looked at my paycheck. I've looked at my lineage. I've looked at my family. I've looked at my current situation. And I have forgotten about the God who made the air that I breathe. And He puts breath in my lungs. He gives me the beat of every heart. And if you're at the top of this list, well, God, I know that can change everything." Abraham is anticipating that God's going to do a miracle. Why? Because faith has decided that He will do a miracle. Faith has decided to obey God no matter what. Then also number three, look at this. Number three in your notes. Faith has decided to leave a legacy of faith. Because when you think about the way the writer of Hebrews has structured this portion of the chapter, he starts with Abraham's decision to obey as he faces the greatest test of his lifetime. And he moves from that to his decision, his pre-decision that God will do the impossible. But now he wants us to see the legacy of faith that Abraham leaves behind. Look at Hebrews 11, verse 20. It says, "It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings for the future of his sons, Jacob and Esau. This is generations 2 and generations 3. Let's see. Then we got verse 21. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. That's generations 3 and generations 4. Notice that each generation, it begins with this. It was by what? Faith. All of them are beginning to put faith in action. This passage is about leaving a legacy of faith. If I can give any encouraging word to fathers in this room this morning, that would be it. If I could give any encouraging word to graduates this morning, that would be it. Make sure your life leaves a legacy of faith, where people look at you and say, man, he is a person of faith. He's not afraid to follow God. He's not afraid to follow God through his relationships. He's not afraid to follow God when God says go. He's not afraid to follow God in his finances. He's not afraid to follow God and do it God's way when it comes to his relationships, when it comes to marriage and all these other things. You see, we're all making decisions and doing things that in these moments affect the next generation that's right there in front of us. The writer of Hebrews wants us to call us back to the decisions that Abraham had made and recognize that your faith is never just for you. And if you see your faith as just about you, then if that's the way that you see your faith, then you will never have nothing to leave for the generations that are coming behind you. Your faith is never meant to be just about you. A recent survey that I read this week said that 30% of Americans have a written will, a written document that gives them instructions on the plan for their stuff when they die. Because how many know that when you die, you don't take your stuff with you? It's just not about your stuff, though. It is important because it shows that you're caring about the people that you're leaving behind. And it's a plan for their future. And some of you are thinking, well, I don't know what I'd even put in a will. I mean, I don't really have anything to put in a will. I don't feel like I have that much to leave. That might be true. But we go to a great effort, to leave a will behind for a physical plan and physical things that we're going to leave behind. But you can leave a spiritual will that leaves a legacy for generations that will follow. What do you think is more important? Do you think it's more important to write down what's going to happen to your necklace, what's going to happen to your car? Listen, I can tell you what's more important. What will affect generations is not what happens to your Kia. What will affect generations is what happens with your faith. Bless the people who come behind you, but bless them primarily by making decisions of faith today that will have a cascading effect over the course of not only one generation or 2 generations, but 3 or 4 generations down the line. Dads, parents, mark your life with decisions of faith. Grandparents, mark your life with decisions of faith. Our leadership team met a few months ago, and we decided we're going to take a step of faith. And we're going to hire another person to come on staff with us. I'm not telling you, it's not going to be easy. It's a step of faith. But we felt like God wanted us to take a step of faith in order to see the church continue to grow and flourish and reach more people for the gospel's sake of Jesus Christ. It was worth the step of faith. We must decide that we are going to obey Him no matter what God tells us to do, that we're going to decide to look to Him to do miraculous things in our lives, in our marriage, in our relationships, in our finances, in our church. And we're going to decide to leave a legacy of faith, because the legacy of faith is going to touch the lives of my kids and my grandkids and my great-great-grandkids and on down the line. What kind of legacy are you leaving with the kind of life that you're living right now? Let me challenge you to live a life of faith. Let's pray. Father, I